I think it's very, very dangerous. We know how important content is. We've never had more content in the history of humankind.
AI isn't just transforming the way that we work, it's rewriting the entire media industry. Please welcome Jasmine Ng.
I'm currently the Executive Director of the Singapore Association of Motion Picture Professionals. We have just recently launched a community app called Kaki Crew, where you can post up jobs, announcements, and find what your larger community is. If you don't have identity, have no sense of ourselves, I think it's very, very dangerous. Do you just subcontract your identity out to other people? Who do you defend when you don't have a sense of yourself? GenAI can be a tool that you can use, or it can be a tool that's kind of used against you or in place of you. It really depends on the circumstance. It's not something that you say is good or bad, but it's here. It's here, and we need to talk about it, and we need to figure out what the challenges are, how it helps us, because it's good that you care enough to say, hey, this should be better. So what can we do next?
Hi, welcome. AI isn't just transforming the way that we work. It's actually rewriting the entire script of our media industry. And if we're not careful, we'll find ourselves as extras instead of the directors of this story. But today's guest isn't waiting for that to happen. In fact, she's taking action. Right now, please meet Jasmine Ng, a visionary leader of Singapore's SAMPP, which is now the driving force behind initiatives to future-proof filmmakers, producers, and content creators against the AI revolution. Welcome, Jasmine.
That's a huge introduction. Okay, thank you for having me. Yeah. So I am the founding president of the Singapore Association of Motion Picture Professionals, SAMPP or SAMP. It is a mouthful. I'm currently the executive director. What our association is we're a group for people who work in, whether it's film, television, digital media content. It's basically for the professionals who work in that industry to come together to work on issues, create conversations, and also engage with different government agencies. Yeah.
Oh, you've been at this a really long time. Like we were just talking about this before we started rolling, and I really appreciate all this that you've been trying to do for our industry, but it hasn't been that smooth a road, has it?
Well, I think it's one of those things where, when it comes down to things like the actual production value, technical skills, creative story, talent, there's a lot of that. In Singapore, we're brimming with that. But when it comes down to things like the professional management of work, or the larger trends of how the industry is growing, we're not very, or at least we can learn to do better about how we can come together to then, work with, whether it's IMDA or whether the Singapore Film Commission, to then see, okay, how do we chart our future? How do we make it sustainable? I mean, this requires all hands on deck. It requires everybody around the table to come together. So with our industry, we don't have, unions that cater for an industry that's largely made up of freelancers. So there are a couple of challenges, right, which are unique to our industry. Whether you're in the petrochemicals industry, whether you're in the beverages manufacturing industry, there's been a labor union movements for that. So that kind of collective action, that sort of working tripartite action, all that is the norm for other industries. It's just not been for ours. So in a sense, we're babies and we're learning. So it's still baby steps. What is unique to our industry is this industry has a lot of freelancers. And that's great for a lot of production houses because you're not filming every single day, right? So sometimes you're doing development work, preparation, you're doing post. When, for example, when you need to film, then you'll hire a freelance cinematographer. So it keeps production companies nimble. And that's why we do have a lot of freelancers. So it's part of how this industry and how we make work. This is how it functions. But in Singapore, historically, there's the Unions Act. And the Unions Act sort of stipulates that people who join unions must be employees. They can't be freelancers.
Yep.
But one thing I always tell people, don't forget that a lot of the times when we call ourselves freelancers, are you really a freelancer if you're somebody who, you're on working on a television series? Yes, you may be a freelancer, but once you start to work on a project for a shoot, you're being told what time to get to work, what tools you use for work, what you eat for lunch, when is lunch break, when you can have a break, what location you're actually filming in. So all this actually, when you all in total, you look at it from a point of view of what is stipulated by the Ministry of Manpower, that actually then looks more like you are employee. However, because we call ourselves freelancers and because it's not steady work where you're working with the same company all the time, you're working with different production companies all the time. So that creates a loophole that makes us not fit one way or the other.
Yep.
Right? But does that mean that we just say, oh, okay, that's too bad? No, it's not too bad. Let's do something about that, because then it requires, letting people know, talking to NTUC, talking to MOM, right? The Employment Act is constantly being reviewed. Every few years, it used to be PMETs were excluded. Now they've been included. So maybe at some point, freelancers can be seen as from the status of your worker. So all workers should, as they have obligations, they also should have protections.
But this also is not new information, because I know that this came out in a book some time ago on the tripartite in Singapore, which they're going to rework on that again with the Pro Bono SG.
Right.
You can tell us a little bit
so
about that.
There's separate initiatives. Like I said, it's not for the lack of trying, but even though a large part of the industry has been freelancers, outside of the industry, a lot of people don't know. People have a lot of misunderstandings about freelancers. They think, oh, you don't like wake up early, is it? Are you kidding me? Freelancers in the media industry are such suckers for pain that they think it is an okay life to be sitting in a car park in the cold, dark night at 3 a.m. waiting for production to start.
Because you're first one on.
It's never about, oh, they're lazy, they won't wake up early, right? So, but I've seen this actually being said at forums, right? At other forums outside of our industry where people say, yeah, freelancers are like this, no, sorry, no. In fact, we're more hardworking than you. And, but the thing about that is, again, because of this recurring thing of sometimes, late payment or no contracts, then misunderstandings, information is not properly put out. There's too much scope for misunderstandings, right? And then when that happens, then, nobody knows what recourse do you have. Like, who do you talk to and all that? So the associations, NTUC, IMDSite, they all came together and came up with this thing called the Tripartite Standards for Procurement of Services for Media Freelancers. Pat on my back for being able to say that in one go, right? And when I tell people from outside of our industry how we work together, tripartite meaning 3 parties, right, from the public sector, the private sector, and the non-profit sector. So the associations working with the companies, working with the government agencies, and also other non-profits, not just the associations, but also NTUC. Well, they came together to work on this thing so that it reminds you that you should have a contract, you should put out payment milestones, you should let people know, what the payment cycle should be, whether there's production insurance and all that. And when I tell the people from other industries about that, they'll go like, in this day and age, in the 21st century, you all had to do that? You mean you all normally don't have that?
Overlooked.
And then you just think like, we're just so developed in some ways, like I said, production skills, production value, technical ability, but we're so underdeveloped in other ways when it comes to that. And part of it, again, is that imbalance of power. If you're a freelancer, you feel like you may not be able to speak up.
Yes.
You feel like, I don't want to be construed to be asking for too much.
Well, you
don't want to be grey listed and all that. So all it takes is one bad habit. But if that's your first encounter, you think that's the norm. And then it just becomes pervasive because people go like, I guess if nobody's asking for it, then how can I ask for it?
No, I don't think it's just that. I think it's also the struggle to just survive, right? In Singapore, if all the schools are pumping out so much talent every year, then they're bound to want to just try to just get one foot in the door at least.
So we say it's not about those of us who have it comfortable. It's about us then coming together to make a stand to say, okay, there are other people in the industry who are not doing so well or may not feel empowered to ask for basic rights.
Yes.
And companies may not feel, a lot of times, while everybody has a diploma or a degree and we're very well educated in that sense, we're very undereducated when it comes down to legal rights and legal obligations. I always have to say it's not about you protecting yourself. What are your obligations as well on both sides, right? So then our awareness in general as Singaporeans about, legal awareness is very poor.
Yes.
Very, very undereducated. That I cannot excuse that because there are resources out there. But what I do understand is when you're angry, when you've not been paid, you're worried about money, you're worried that the payment that was due to you 2 months ago for a job that you did, 3 months ago, you don't know whether at the end of the month you're going to get paid.
Correct.
And during the pandemic, when that was happening, people didn't even know that the company that owes you money, whether they'll be able to survive. And the companies themselves don't know whether their clients have survived. So so it's that chain of like needing to go upstream and needing to do this in a larger community way so that we work on this together. So you don't feel you're struggling by yourself.
No, I totally agree with you 100%. In fact, I'm really adverse to the term freelancers because a lot of the clients wouldn't mind just trying to undercut and haggle the pot to be a lot slimmer. I mean, it's not really their fault either. It's a very, very difficult market at this point in time. People from the creative industries are not exactly the best business people. I think that's where we really need help. I think that's where you guys come in.
We've always moved along with technology. You're learning the new cameras, you're learning new software. You're always conquering like new challenges all the time. Production is all about solving solutions.
Yes.
You're always like out of time, out of budget, even before you really start. So in a sense, the one maybe common thing for people in media production is we're suckers for pain, right? But does it mean that we should be abused or be treated badly or, be disadvantaged? No, I think even as we put time into investing into ourselves by learning, new skills, it is equally important to learn the skills of managing our work. So I think it's because the industry, not just in Singapore, but very elsewhere, right, that you do need professionals, whether they are a cinematographer, a gaffer, a script writer, an actor, but a lot of them, because straight out of school, when they come into the industry, they may not have worked in a company environment.
Yep.
So those kind of things that even somebody who's an employee doesn't really think about, much less if as soon as you came into workforce, you never knew any of that and you're working as a freelancer. So a lot of times you're just gearing to do the exciting work and you forget that there's this other aspect of your work that needs to be tended to as well. So it's that form of education of knowing what your legal obligations are, your legal protections are, your sort of other forms of like policy obligations, like which are catered towards you being able to provide for yourself, like CPF, taxes, right? These are the things that it's every citizen's obligation, because that it also means then you're provided for. That education is boring, it's unsexy. Nobody wants to think about these things.
When are we then going to find the time to be able to even bring ourselves up to speed in the first place?
As an association, we're not great at promoting ourselves. Most of the time we're engaging on issues more behind the scenes, because as you know, exactly as you said, most times you're just struggling to get your productions going, to get work going. And once you're in the thick of it, you don't really have time. Like we said, in media production, there's no sense of what is the work day, what is a weekend, what is a public holiday. It's very overwhelming, right? So then but you may not have, that bandwidth to deal with everything else as well. So as an association, along with other associations, all of us are trying to do what we can to prompt our members to think about these things, working with NTUC, working with MOM, CPF board, to then prompt people like, hey, it's tax time. Why should you do this? How should you file? This is the way to do it so that you are protecting yourself. You whatever you can to squirrel away something for retirement, something for your medical care, with MediSave. Again, these are boring things, but we do little things like that to prompt and remind people. But to do that, we need to reach people. And because the associations were not funded, some associations have membership fees. We have not been charging membership fee ever since the beginning of 2020.
Because of the pandemic.
Right. It's something where we are trying to reach as many members, but that also takes time and effort to promote yourself. And again, limited bandwidth. We do what we can. So things can only start to happen when people gather, put effort to say, hey, let's gather at this same watering hole. So to have a common space where we can all tap into information together, share tips. A lot of people came up to me and said, I'm not the sort who go and talk to government, or I'm not in what, but I totally support you. And that's already a step that they showed up, they listen, they go and talk to other people about it. They educate themselves. We have a dialogue together. That's small little actions you can take. So that's the intention that we have just recently launched at what we call SAMPP Social just 2 days ago, an event to launch an app that we have been working on. It's a community app called Kaki Crew. So most
Hold
of
on,
us,
Kaki
Crew. The idea of kaki is, colloquially in Malay, it literally means your leg, and the idea figuratively is like, hey, your friends are your kaki, your buddies are, they prop you up, they get you going. So the idea, your people in the industry are your kakis. So Kaki Crew, let's gather together. The intention is that it's a community app where you can post up your job profiles, you can post up jobs. But more than anything else, we wanted to make sure that also, by posting announcements there, people will find out if there are certain grants which, you can tap onto, if there are master classes you can attend. Production is tough, but actually a lot of us work very hard to make sure things don't fall over. We like to panic early, we like to prepare a lot, we work really, really hard. And a lot of people are struggling with so many things already. So how can we minimize that paperwork? So that, like we said, if you post up a job on Kaki Crew, we've made sure that, it's just a drop-down menu, and you just need to click, 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 and put in the information that you need to then help you connect to people you might want to hire and connect you to a larger pool of people. Whatever you put into that post, you don't have to repeat and call and give the same information to different people and type into different things. Once you've shortlisted or selected the person you're going to, work with on this particular job, all the information that you've already put into your job post auto-populates into a contract template. If you have your own job, your contract template, you can just download it as a draft, or should you want to just treat that as already as your contract. So we try to minimize all that paperwork and the little humps that people kind of knocked into every time when they're already dashing to do so many things to get a production going, right? So, it's a form of education, it's a form of awareness.
One of the things that actually came to mind was there are so many apps out there already that you can actually post your jobs and everything. But this one, I love the idea that this is specific for our industry. All the information that you've already gathered and put onto the SAMPP, and if people are not even too cluey about where to go to find it, this is also one space that you can actually reach out and ping them for, timely information. The only question is, what good is an app if people don't actually use it?
It's completely useless. An app is completely useless if nobody uses it.
Yeah, but
if the people who are in the industry don't join the app, then the companies won't come and post the jobs.
Exactly.
So it needs for both to come. And like you said, yes, there are many other platforms such as this Careers SG one.
Yes.
Those are usually for full-time jobs. They're not for 3-day shoots. They're not that well catered for freelancers. But like I said, I think, earlier on we were talking about the Tripartite Standards for procurement of services for media freelancers. They also put in this requirement that companies who do want to get a grants from IMDA, they have to be a signatory to the Tripartite Standards. But the problem is a lot of the freelancers themselves who then take on the jobs don't even know about Tripartite Standards.
Yes.
But it's not from the lack of trying, because IMDA and NTUC and ourselves have put the word out. It's just that if people are just going to go like, so many email already, no time, then you are the problem.
Yeah.
You are the problem because, yes, it takes effort. I need for you to just put in that little effort to learn about this, because in you learning about it, you help to protect yourself, and you then can spread information to other people, so that then there's a larger community, we can protect each other, and we can find out about our obligations and again our protections that way. I understand, I know it's tiring, you're worried about your job, you're worried about late payments, then nothing will ever be fixed.
Yep. This is something that I think could be a rebranding challenge for our industry, because we are in this area of branding, of communication, and we put so much effort in helping other people's communications be clear and memorable, but we don't put it into our own information that is actually relevant and extremely important for us to scale.
One of the other initiatives that we've been working on more than 1 year ago is that, obviously with, developments in GenAI, like I remember from beginning of last year, with every month, at the beginning I was like, okay, Sora, okay, I don't know, maybe 2 more years, 3 more years. Less than 2 months later, okay, you're looking at Kling and go like, okay, it's one thing to see the clip of a panda driving a taxi, but then there was the next clip made me just like shit myself, literally. Not literally, figuratively. It might have felt that way, right? It was a shot. It was a GenAI shot from Kling of a boy biting into a hamburger, and when I saw that, I was like, oh my god. I think about, easily like a quarter of, all the mid-budget television commercials are people biting into a hamburger from McDonald's, Burger King, KFC chicken. It's all those food shots that we put lots of work into lighting it properly, having the director work with the child talent, having the copywriter write the right kind of like, catchy catchphrase and things like that. All that work, it's all of a sudden it's like, oh, a crew that usually would have taken 10 people more, depending on what size budgets to do all that work, all of a sudden that's all gone. But it's not to say that that work is gone. That work was done. That work was done by many, many people. But then, unless it is, something like, Adobe, where they actually did license all that footage, the rest of the apps, they basically just took everybody else's work and then made it into something that, in effect, I do say that GenAI can be a tool that you can use, or it can be a tool that's kind of used against you or in place of you. But yet at the same time, you need to do that thinking of whether, have you paid for the rights? What are the copyright issues? What are the possible infringements? Can you be selling that to a client if you cannot guarantee them that a few months down the line, somebody might say, that stuff that you claim you did, actually that frame completely is a ripoff of something that's existing that was used to train the LLM, the large language model. So all that has not been attended to, right? So that it gives you this perception that you are making something, but actually, in fact, you're stealing.
Yes.
Okay, that AI company stole so that you think that you could make it. But I think we need to be more humble and more appreciative of that kind of labor and value and things like that. It's really about, if you're going to use it so that you can create something, you need to pay for it. And that's why the irony of a lot of, the GenAI companies who know to be upset and that they thought that DeepSeek was stole from them, they need to also acknowledge they might be stealing from others. However, of course, there are a lot of GenAI companies who also then deal with it by making sure they license the material that they've trained their large language models on, and that's great. So it requires for all this kind of different ways to talk, it requires many different things to be attended to, and we are only barely starting to figure things out, right? So what we started to do is we came together with all the other associations. So it's us, SAMPP, with Singapore Association of Motion Picture Professionals, along with the Singapore Society of Cinematographers, along with the Actors Society and the Screenwriters Association of Singapore, and IPRO, which is the Association of Independent Producers, right? We all came together, and like I said, even though some of us are impacted on less, we have to show some stewardship. We have to show some leadership to say, these might be the issues. Let's talk about this. And we've come up with this idea of the 4 T's, right? The first T is the idea of talent. Already in the beginning of last year, which is the beginning of 2024, a lot of the voiceover talents, a lot of the screen talent who also do voiceovers, they're already starting to lose their jobs. 30%, middle of the year, 50%. I think up to now, people have lost up to more than 70% of their jobs, right? A few months ago, we're having a meeting and somebody came late to that meeting because this person said, oh, I got a voiceover talent last minute booking. We're like, oh my God, great for you. There's still voice recording jobs. And the person said, no, actually it was a government job and they were using GenAI. And I can't remember what the actual script is, but it was something like, because the GenAI couldn't do a Singapore accent and said, kopi siu tai.
Yes.
So they had to bring the human in last minute to do the last bit of work that the GenAI couldn't do. However, that's not going to be the case. GenAI is going to be able to, once there's enough, again, training on local materials. The reason why it's not hit us so hard yet is, I think, because we haven't done enough of the training rapidly enough to get that Singapore accent or, that Singapore look and things like that. So that brings to the second T of training, right? How do we train people differently in schools then? If even before they came to school, they've been using GenAI all their lives, because there'll be students very quickly who all they know was GenAI.
Well, that's actually something that I wanted to bring up as well, because the people who are working and struggling and trying their best to just stay relevant, they probably don't have that time. I would be so pissed if I was listening into this and right at the crossroads in the midpoint of this conversation, I was probably going to just scream at the camera and say, hey, you want me to go and do all this research to keep myself up to standards with like this tripartite stuff, find out about this, get myself trained in that, and all about getting the nuances of our industry, our government grants, and all these signatories. And then now you're telling me that I need to get myself up to scratch with all this Gen AI stuff. Like, when am I going to do any work? You know what I mean?
I'll say this. I think, we have been very good about learning the new camera, learning the new software, and putting time towards that. What we need to do is assign just as much attention and give value to then learning about these other things, which is the professional management aspects, the regulation aspects, the legal aspects, and then also things like GenAI. It's yet another tool that you need to be aware of. You need to know and think such a thing. How will this impact on my job? A job that I think that I might, work all my life in. Many of us have worked through the entire industry and have had a great career.
Yes.
But for somebody in their 30s or 40s and who own a lot of equipment, they need to think very differently about their jobs, right? And whether that their equipment is going to serve them when that could be replaced. And like I said, as a director myself, as an EP, as a producer, I look at these tools and go like, oh my God, the possibilities are amazing.
Yes.
But why would I want to use this, and how do I use this, and what I'm trying to do with it? Something that needs for you to consciously think about. As crew, also go experiment in the same way you go and play with another camera, work with this new lens, work with this other color space. You need to try these things out because you need to know the dimensions of how this is going to have impact on your life, on your livelihood, right? So what we want to do is raise awareness. We're not saying it's wrong or right or what. We're just saying that it's you for yourself to look at your own job role. And then by attending the talks that we intend to have, the focus groups that we intend to have, and the surveys, by participating in all this, then we can get a sense of like how different people are impacted differently. So we can tell a fuller, richer, more authentic, real story. It's not just a good or bad. That's just a bad, boring film. If you just say, oh, happy ending, or oh, the villain is only like this, it's not that. We don't want to flatten it because that's not going to serve anyone. And of course, everybody is very excited about the developments and the possibilities that GenAI offers. I mean, of course, who would argue that if this is going to help churning out simulations for different kind of formulations for pharmaceuticals, which are going to cure people? No problem. Please use lots of GenAI, because it's data that was trained and it was properly acquired and and that's going to do some good, right? But then for media, it requires a whole other conversation. Is media so disposable, and so much of what we put is so throw away anyway that we don't really care that maybe we're environmentally being sustainable by not having to shoot? Maybe, there's more carbon credits saved, we need to think about all these different dimensions, right? But at the end of the day, I just feel that that conversation needs to start. And this is where we're working with, IMDA and the other government agencies to talk about putting together this code of best practices, right? Because then we need to say, hey, it's going to hit people differently. If you're a copywriter versus a long form screenwriter, it hits differently. If you are a event videographer, there's still live events. You'll still have jobs. But then if you're corporate video, making short corporate videos, which then can be GenAI altogether, or mid-budget television commercials, wow, then, hey, think about it now, okay? Think about it now. Let's prepare.
For something else.
Yeah.
I mean, all the single events that you cannot replicate, like, weddings, events, and conferences, people really want to then elevate and relive those moments. And that's where the production value would come in handy.
Again, all those kind of things with the advent of GenAI, it's so new to all of us. We don't know what the full dimensions are. And we're kind of like, let's work on it together. Let's worry together. Let's get hopeful together. Let's be ambitious together. The reason why we've also spoken to other government agencies apart from IMDA and MDDI and the National AI Group is because we also need to talk about the National Arts Council, right? Because when you see the full ecosystem, then you know how these things are interconnected. When it comes down to actors, right? A lot of the theatre actors, their passion may be in theatre, but their bread and butter, what gives them a living, is working in doing television commercials, doing corporate videos. But if those jobs are gone because it's replaced by GenAI, and that if there's nothing we can do about that because it's free market, right? Then if these people their bread and butter is taken away, then how will they be able to sustain working in theatre, right? We need to talk about that, because then I think at the end of the day, you need to ask yourself how things are interrelated, not just look at one small corner, look at the big picture, that a partial collapse here is going to hit the colony, it's going to collapse over there too, because they're linked. And you can't just say, this is my piece of the pie, I only look at this. You got to look at the larger picture.
Yep.
And it's about how you decide on how value is assigned, where there are many levers that we can use, because we get to decide what we think matters, right? If you think that screenwriters, you like to watch lots of content, but you don't like to pay for it, you have assigned a negative value towards something. But if you enjoy it so much, but you still don't think that you should pay a ticket for it, and you just want to watch it pirated or whatever, then you need to then acknowledge there's value to me, but I'm going to steal it, right? It's something to say that, oh, Singapore culture is important, but don't want to, put together a proper budget. And there's some very real things to talk about, right? Because you can just say, everybody knows that Singapore is a very expensive city to live in, right? Not just to run a company, because every single person who works in the company has to go buy a flat, has to service, the housing loan and everything. How can we be more efficient? How can we be more cost efficient? While we do know many jobs are actually being done outside of Singapore, let's see how we can balance it so that there's still a pipeline for training for the top-notch stuff. Because we can't say, oh yeah, Crazy Rich Asians, yeah, it's set in Singapore, but because of budget, most of it was filmed in Malaysia. Okay, we can say, yes, it's a commercial film, but we did put in a lot of resources. There were hope and dreams of the local industry, and the Singapore Film Commission and IMDA did help to make that a reality, that they could film in Singapore. It's all about assigning the right value. It's all about using the right metrics, right? And certain things we need to say, oh, we need to do it here because we do think that it's important, that we do continue to train people and give them to train up the pipeline.
I can hear so many conversations about this topic and how we want to just relinquish the responsibility and push this up to establishments, CMEs, SMEs, and government agencies, always falling back to the what can one person do a lot. Because I remember this one quote, how you act and what you put your dollar to is a vote for the future that you want for yourself. And this is for everybody, because you're kind of relinquishing your responsibility and your power to somebody else.
What are the stakes? The stakes are the other two T's towards what we were saying about the code of best practices for GenAI use in our local media production industry, right? First, we said the first T for talent, for training, and the other two T's are transparency and trust, right?
Yes.
How do we use it as a tool for some jobs where the tool might replace you? Then how then you reskill to do better? This is not just training within the schools, but also, when you're already in industry, then how can you train higher or train differently to reskill? Trust is such an important, very important, it's a social compact that we have with our audiences. While we're saying, hey, this is a fiction story, this is made up, hey, this is animation, but we're trying to convey real feelings. We're trying to give accurate information. And if you're not transparent, and when you use AI to represent something, particularly for things like documentary, nonfiction. So already a lot of times, because archives can be very costly, a lot of people, documentaries may not be able to, there might be video footage, there might be photos, but they can't afford to license it. So some people have been used ways like animation and such. But now with GenAI tools where you can actually replicate the look of the cameras of that time and create a photo or even a film clip and then use it in your storytelling. And while that helps with the storytelling, it's important for you to then to mark it out, to say, hey, put a watermark and say this is made with AI, or put it in your credits. Because what is really starting to happen is when you don't identify it, a lot of these archives, which are actually fake archives, they're not real. They can be used for purposes of storytelling, but when it's not marked out, a lot of it goes back out into the public domain, and people think that really happened.
AI will not be able to
and
tell.
it will
They will
recirculate into the public domain. People will think that that is actually real, and the AI will retrain on GenAI thinking that's real, and then it becomes this never-ending cycle. So that is important, because ultimately, what does that impact on is trust.
Yes.
That it's a bit scary that we're able to say oh, what was it like in the late 30s where it turned the public into believing things which were really very scary and thinking it's okay to weaponize against other types of people.
I totally agree with you. In fact, I'm so glad that you brought up the social compact, which is actually the collective commitment to finding and assigning value, because it is in some way a social contract. We started to then doubt whether the news was newsworthy.
It's scary.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
really, really scary.
We went on to social media to get that news.
And it's feeding that addiction of like breaking news, that everybody just wants something sensational.
Exactly.
Because people treat news as entertainment. But I understand, that it's tough because everybody's fighting the algorithm and we need to put our attentions to this, right? And this is a trustworthy, safe space. You can have a difference of opinion, but then that can be exercised as difference of opinion, right? But at the end of the day, what are best practices about? It's just basic, don't be an asshole, right? If you're going to make GenAI, but trained on somebody's likeness, you need to get their consent.
Yes.
It's about this sort of, just basic respect, basic dignity. We don't have to wait for laws to be made in other people's countries. Before then, we look towards making our own GenAI laws, because we can look to existing laws, and existing common sense and just dignity and respect for others.
This really is a really scary space to be in right now. And I did want to bring up where the first signs of this need arised, and it was that open letter that we were speaking about.
There was an open letter that the Singapore writers put in, to ask about, hey, for the large language models that are being trained on local materials, has consent been sought so that the rights holders, the people the creators, the writers, could give consent. So it's a bit of some people say it's a chicken and an egg, or an egg thing, or they'll say, oh, don't you want representation? If we don't train on your local material, then there isn't a GenAI representation of, Singaporean, lives and different sort of, our multicultural, multiracial identities are not reflected. But I don't think anybody is trying to say, oh, we don't want to be represented. I think people want our stories to be represented. They want our talents to be represented. But they also want to be told that their materials are being used, and then they want opportunities to consent or not. It shouldn't just be, thought of as something that should be done as like, it's good for you, what, so again, out of the good intentions, I think it needed all parties again to talk to each other. There were good intentions was to have representation of Singaporean identities by training on all these materials. But then good intentions should also mean we should have intentions of acknowledging the labor that you put into this, and we acknowledge you're the rights holder, and I should ask you for your permission. Educators this time, right, they also have to struggle to how to acknowledge the use of GenAI tools with their students, right? And even using GenAI with their students in class so that they can figure out what the shortfalls are. Understand you must figure out what to prompt first and what your intentions are before you can feed it into the GenAI, and then what you must critique after it spits it out. Then you must do the due work of reviewing it, right? So a lot of people are using the tools and finding ways to use it in a meaningful way, but without giving up your original responsibility, which is to use your own original GenAI, which is your brain, and struggle with your conscience, struggle with your own personality, your own principles.
It's Gen HI versus Gen AI, isn't it? Human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. And that's exactly the same thing with your own questioning your brain. Your prompts that you put into Gen AI is going to give you the results, whether it's a good result or it's going to be rubbish in, rubbish out. It's the same, how we ask critical questions to get the right answers that we want is also a skill that we have to develop. And I think that this is actually a really good chance for our audiences, young and old, to start taking their time, slowing down and figuring out what it is they actually are looking for and formulating that back into the questions that they prompt. Like, how can crew find resources to upgrade themselves? I mean, we haven't actually talked about this yet, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we, as SAMPP, as SAM, as a Singapore Association of Motion Picture Professionals, we have been also working with the other associations on trying to make sure that, along with IMDA and SkillsFuture Singapore, that, they offer there are resources and access to courses and training, right? And it requires us to be able to do that because, consultants, if they're not from the industry, not from the ground, they're not going to know. So we've intervened quite a bit to make sure that the consultants are more educated on these things, and so that SkillsFuture also providing for people already in the industry, because a lot of the courses tend to be geared towards people who want to enter the industry. So there might be the 101 introductory courses, which are fine, but if you're already in industry, you want to upgrade, don't you want more intermediate and advanced courses? But then we also realized that there was a challenge towards getting lecturers, because SkillsFuture requires that they have training certification, which used to be you have to put in quite a lot of hours to take. Now, training the trainer is important, but it also means that, how do we make sure that working professionals who also want to teach are able to then be certified, they are able to, and also that we don't make a hindrance for them, right? So while the IHLs can do CET, continuing education, but also then working professionals can also train, because then if they do that, if they're certified to teach, and that way they can teach the more intermediate and advanced courses that we in the industry want to tap on.
Correct.
So, sometimes in the whole thing to nationalize and centralize everything, it can't be a one size fits all. So that's always a struggle. So then it's for us as an industry, say, hey, there's a situation. But the thing is, if you just one person say in different corners, it's hard for this to be heard as, it's just anecdotal.
Collective.
But that's why when we work together with the associations, and we, started to work with IMDA and, Institute of Adult Learning and SkillsFuture, then they could understand what was different about our industry, that you couldn't use the one size fits all model.
Correct. I mean, what used to be for ACTA, ACLP certifications would be a 9-month, course that you would have to commit to from start to the end.
Now it's a little shorter. It used to be a lot. It used to be a lot longer. It used to be 119 hours of training across anything from 11 to 13 months, depending on the wait list. Yeah.
Yes, I remember the period. And I mean, thankfully to your effort, as well as, to IMDA and WSQ, there was the Media Sandbox that was put together about like 1.5 years ago. I was very glad I was part of that community as well, to try to put the first batch out. And I know that with that, there are 22, advanced coaches able to...
14.
14.
It's okay.
Okay.
But
14 advanced coaches.
Yeah, what was important is that, from that dialogue with the different agencies, right, when we could understand, how they built their policies and why they needed to do it in a certain way, and they could understand from our point of view why it needed to be contextualized for our media industry. And then how do we train, how do we teach, how do we learn, and how do we right size it so that it has the right impact, right? Because a lot of resources are given, but sometimes it just doesn't land, and that's where we need to come together to work on it, right? And other things like the refresh and renew of the skills framework, that's where basically they map out all the different careers in particular industries, and then from there they can figure out, what are the skills and competencies that are required, which then can inform into what kind of courses need to be taught in the different IHLs, the different Institute of Higher Learning, and also what are the different training centers out there, approved training organizations what are courses which will be approved for subsidies and for SkillsFuture, WSQ funding. But all that requires, again, knowledge from the ground, from the specialists on the ground, to say, hey, these are where the gaps are and all that. And there were other gaps which wasn't tended to in the first round, but this time round we said, hey, we have to add actors, we have to add screen talent, we have to add also the photographers, we have to add intimacy coordinators, action choreographers. These are all the people who make up the industry, right? So then, with that, what kind of courses that will be available for us to then train up, so these are things that continuously, as things change. And again, the question is, how much of this is relevant as GenAI develops? Again, that needs to be a continuing, conversation where we inform and educate each other.
No, I mean, I know that we're running out of time already.
Oh, okay.
But I did want to broach a subject on this, because I know that a lot of people are trying to find a way to then advance themselves, in higher learning, and just actually just get up to speed, maybe even, and use up those SkillsFuture credits, right? But a lot of the times, our very first conversation actually began with with freelance careers. A lot of them don't have that space, for the breadth to actually get themselves into courses. If it's in CETs, which is continuous, in institutions where they have to go to like every day. Is there a solution to that?
So there are courses where there are shorter durations. So there are 1 to 3 days, for example. So there's something that we're bringing up to SkillsFuture is that for some courses, you have to register a week in advance.
Oh,
But we're trying to say, it should be the ones where, you just, as long as you arrive, you register a day before, because again, for freelancers, it's hard for people to know, of course, if you can a job, you'll take a job over a course.
yes.
That's just the hard reality of it, right? But if we are able to keep the courses in such a way where you enroll, you can enroll right up to the day before, that would be quite useful.
And that's really important to say, because a lot of people would not actually think about course correction.
It's not that they didn't think about it, it's just that they may attend for the larger, they may attend for the, the usual workforce, which has a scenario where their companies let them take leave, paid leave to attend a course. But that's not the scenario for freelancers in the media production industry. So we need to then remind of that reality.
Yeah, correct. I think this is something that a lot of people don't actually understand, or they can't wrap their heads around. And I think it really needs to be an education issue, where people will then be more aware and more accepting of all these nuances of the different ways that people work.
Yeah. And I mean, it's good also that IMDA, they're hiring more people from the industry.
Yeah.
So then, of course, all the officers are working very hard.
Yeah.
But it is, we need to also acknowledge that our industry is not a very, it's not something that fits neatly into boxes. So I do acknowledge that, work may be, it's hard. And also when there's so many freelancers, it's hard for them to go and talk to every single person. And that's why associations matter, communities matter. As a government agency, you can't go and talk to every single person, or know where to find them. And that's why it's important that we do the first work of just gathering in a space and say, okay, we're all here, over here, we're all here. Easier for you to talk. Let's have a conversation. Come to the same table and let's have a conversation.
No, I mean, I'm laughing because it's like, we were just talking about like how small Singapore is and how easy it should be to like manage this small little island community, but it's not, because of the nature of our work, and it's just so difficult to get all these creative people together, because I mean, that's what you're paying them for, that creativity, that ability to just stretch and play outside of the margins a little bit, and that's their strength. Unfortunately, that is also their weakness, but we're not seeing it in that lens. We're just like, oh, you should be able to do that strength, but still play within our rules. And it just doesn't work that way. Or it could, but it would need a little bit more guidance.
Absolutely, because I think, a lot of times when there are focus groups and there are dialogues or town halls, the people who do show up tend to be more the directors and the producers, because if they're not on shoot, even while they're in the middle of production, it's easier for them to take time out. But whereas for people who basically, when they work by the work day.
Yes.
They can't just pop out for 2 hours from a set, or they, because their job is like they get paid when they're working on a shoot. We can't be able to find that one time when everyone is free. So then we do what we can, at each point, and we just be mindful that we open enough sessions within our means so that people can come together.
Yeah.
But like I said, it takes for everyone around the table to do that.
I like to come back to the point about that membership. You were charging all the way until the start of the pandemic. And I know that during this period, you actually were the one that tried to get everybody else, like, the big, larger corporations like MediaCorp and so on, to try to gather and pull together a small fund to actually help people that were out of a job.
So around that time, towards the end of January 2020, Chinese New Year, a lot of the jobs were already being postponed and cancelled. So we knew they were in for a really, really horrible time.
Yes.
So we knew that our industry would be hit because, of course, we tend to work in larger groups. So we refunded our members their membership fees. We pulled together a relief fund. It was great that IMDA and MediaCorp actually chipped in. They actually donated towards our fund as well. And people in the industry, you know, those who were able to also were able to contribute. So that way, we, you know, for those who weren't able to work but were in tighter situations, we were able to extend a relief grant to anyone, not just members, to anyone in the industry. And we did that because we knew that for the long haul, we want to make sure that people survive this stage. Once we were in the circuit breaker period, we really started scrambling to say, okay, how are other countries and other industries dealing with this, right? What are the safety protocols? When we come out of circuit breaker, we're able to go back onto locations, onto shoots. What can we do to protect ourselves? And also then give enough confidence to the government that we can take care of ourselves. We can make sure that our crew, our talents, people behind the camera, in front of the camera can be safe. We can keep the public safe as well. Please let us get back to work. And this is then what we need to do when we're miking people up, when we're doing makeup. Oh, how do we put, you know, we can't tell the actors, hey, we can shoot now. Can you take off your mask? But everybody has a mask on, right? So all these things require everybody up and down the production chain to come together and then work out these are the protocols. It would make work cumbersome, but that cumbersomeness provides for your protection so that you can continue to work so that you don't get sick.
When you start to think about it, it's January, February, March. This is usually the Chinese New Year period, you know, in Singapore, where there's so much activity, so much filming, so much events that's going on, and people needing to just go and cover all these events. Our industry was probably the first few industries to ramp up and come back to work on a larger scale. And just understanding the safety protocols that everybody had to abide by, it gave people the confidence that, you know what, we will be able to get through this and we can get life back to normal despite everything that's going on around the world.
Absolutely, because, you know, as we were starting to talk about a little earlier, everybody needs content.
Yes.
Right? So, of course, during the pandemic, especially in the earlier few months, information needed to go out. People started recording things at home via Zoom, filming from their own laptops, their own little mobile devices and all that. But it was important that information got out there, that we still shared content that could boost morale and all that. We know how important content is. We've never had more content in the history of humankind, right? Everybody needs something. And in fact, we struggle with, as you were starting to say, you know, don't we pay more attention to it? We do pay attention because we know we need it. We know we're glued to our devices all the time. You're struggling to make your spouse or your child, you know, cut down on their time. People are just consuming content all the time.
And truth be told, it was actually one of the things that was keeping families from fighting all the time when they're stuck in the house under this chronic stress about what was going on in the world.
There are all kinds of different challenges. You know, it's one thing that, you know, it keeps us entertained, it boosts our morale. But at the same time, we also know there are other competing challenges because as we're all watching, we're not watching together.
Yes.
You know, you might be in the same room, but you're all on different devices. You know, you're not watching the same content. And of course, during the pandemic, that's where everybody started subscribing to, you know, OTT platforms, right? The streaming platforms. And that is also a challenge because then people are not watching the local productions on MediaCorp. They may not be watching as much local content. And in this day and age, it has been a while. You know, we're proud of our broadband speeds. We've always been the fastest, one of the fastest, you know, in Asia. But it also means that with that speed and all that technology, we can watch any content from anywhere in the world, anytime on a device.
Yes.
Then there are different challenges too. Then how do we make sure that some of that attention is also put towards watching our own stories made in Singapore, made by Singaporeans? You know, that is
always been an issue though.
So, you know, that's something that it's another situation that we find ourselves, we need to be talking about this and dealing with this, right? It's one thing to say, hey, everybody likes to watch K-drama, whether you're Chinese, Malay, or Indian, everybody's watching K-drama. But it is also important to watch our own stories and not just stories about ourselves, stories about our neighbors, stories about other sides of Singapore that we're not really think about all our different identities. It's important. And something that I've always, you know, struggled with is that oftentimes when you ask Singaporean, and this is not just something to do with film and TV, it's also to do with music, literature, you know, that people do read, They do listen to music, they do watch a lot of content, but oftentimes it's not Singaporean ones, right? And then the question is, when you ask, why don't you? And you're like, nah, it sucks. It's not as good as whatever. It's okay that you say it sucks, that you think it sucks. But I think the important thing is to ask, each of us has to ask ourselves, why do you think it sucks? What can we do about it? Let's fix this because we deserve better. And it's important that we know ourselves. We know our other selves next to us in the same country. It's important to have these kind of stories, because if we don't have identity, have no sense of ourselves, I think it's very, very dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, this comes into two parts, actually. I mean, when you start to think about why, I mean, I've been struggling with this for the longest time, right? It's like, when you start thinking about what is your local identity, what is, we are really young as a nation, right? We're like 60 years old this year. But at the same time, we also have a little trouble trying to understand what we represent.
I think we do have pretty good senses of ourselves.
Yes.
I think it's just that constantly we're competing with other people who have more larger budgets, longer histories. So it's something that we have continuously work on. And as we've always said, Singapore television, Singapore films, it's culture as well. It's not just commerce. It's not just box office. It is culture. It is art, right? If the Koreans don't make Korean language content, who else is going to make it for them and about their stories? If the Thais don't make stories about themselves in Thai language, who else is going to make it for them? But in Singapore, we've always been watching other people's stories, films, television, movies, everything. We're watching everybody else's, and with our talent of being able to access so many different languages, we access other people's, but it's also, we need to access our own. So it's again another unique situation that we don't share with many other countries, right? If the Icelandic people said, oh, we're such a small population, it's not cost efficient for us to make our own content, do you just subcontract your identity out to other people? And we need to attend to that. And sometimes I've joked about this and said this should actually be a MINDEF issue, because it's about total defense, right? It's that psychological defense. Who do you defend when you don't have a sense of yourself?
I totally agree with you 100%. I actually have a theory about this, and I'd like to run this past you if you don't mind. When you get into a film, it's usually not easy. There's always ups and downs. I mean, the joke about, Murphy's Law and everything comes into play here, where something that can go wrong will go wrong. And everybody just comes together with this focused vision to just get that right. We also then play it back into life. And with struggle comes unity and comes the stories. I wouldn't say we've gone through a lot of struggle, more so than, other nations. We have had our fair share of struggle, of trying to figure out our identities, of having internal race battles and wars and stuff like that. But by and large, I think we've had a pretty comfortable life. And of course, this is something we should be celebrating, but at the same time, we don't want to rock that boat too much anyway. But we do complain a lot of the status quo of the way it is here in Singapore. I think that has been our narrative. We have been trying to push forward with what we have and come to terms with having so much that we shouldn't actually complain.
I don't think it's a terrible thing to have a habit of complaining. If your complaint is legit and it comes from a place of wanting to make things better, it's good that you complain, because it's good that you care enough to say, hey, this should be better. So what can we do next to make it better? Oh, actually, I can do this. Actually, I don't know how to do this, but I can ask somebody else. And maybe I can, if I can't come up with a solution, I can at least get people together. I think that's where it needs to go, right? Because it's just so sad to stay still and complain and not go anywhere. And you just feel defeated. Why would you want to keep feeling that way? It's such a waste of energy and time.
It's mindset, isn't it?
Like I said, a lot of people are not used to, within our industry, are not used to the idea of associations or unions. But then it's a form of education. It's a muscle that we need to exercise. But I think you need to kind of interrogate what's behind that, right? Because then it is down to what motivates that you thought it was okay to demean someone for your own entertainment.
Exactly.
And that, with or without GenAI, is something that we need to work on.
Well, this is something that actually came up in our last conversation with Ethan Xiao, that GenAI, AI, they're just tools, and they are actually a reflection of the human condition. which is really scary if you start to see what people are using it for and how GenAI or AI are starting to then react and spit information out to you as fact. Gathering everything that we've been saying during this conversation with this GenAI, it could actually be the perfect timing to come on in this, I wouldn't say one time, but in this space and in this period to start thinking about how they can actually add value, come back, add to the conversation. And I love this quote, right? It's something along the lines of the pain of staying the same outweighs the pain of change. And then and only then will we start to change and move, right? And I think this is that time where AI starts to hit and really affect all of us at different stages, different areas. And maybe now we can finally capture the attention of everybody and say like, hey, can we just get together and find a time, a space, or a platform to talk? And I really want this to be Kaki Crew. Personally, also because I've been trying to find a way to just reach more of this crew, but it's such an isolating career where some people think that, you know, if they share, they might get that job or their skills taken away from them, because right now we're really acting from a space of fear and we're more guarded. But I think right now should be the opposite, where we start to just expand and just have that dialogue and start talking to each other so that we can actually get more information out, get more people talking and working together so that we can, I don't know, try to find a way to then amplify our craft.
2000%. Let's get on to it. I mean, slowly, surely, but we just need to do the work.
Yeah, we need to do the work, and we've got to get people to trust us back and trust them that they will be able to do that work. Because it's not about not finding the time, it's about timing. And I think the timing is right now. I really do. Because
it's just, it's a deadline we can't push.
Exactly.
It's something we can't,
AI is here.
if we don't do it, there's no road for you to kick the can down.
Exactly. AI is already here. Thank you so much for your time, for putting all these things together over so many years. And I'm so happy that Kaki Crew has finally come.
Thank you. And all hands on deck. Let's do it together.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.